Now, in my video about training frequency, volume, and intensity, I referred to training intensity being proximity to failure, or how close to failure that you are in a set. Now, I wanted to do a separate video on this because it is actually quite, one, a difficult thing to interpret when you're in your training sessions and in your sets, but two, because it is actually so powerful in order to drive progress. Most people, on average, can perform up to 5 more reps than they initially believed that they can in the beginner stages of their training. And studies actually back this. They had a number of people train to the point where they thought they had no more reps in them, and then they stopped, and then whoever was controlling the study would then tell them to do more until they made them go to the point where they couldn't do any more physically, as opposed to just tapping out mentally. And on average, they performed 5 more. So for most people, you have what's called a panic response. Most people's panic response, studies have now shown, on average kicks in about 5 reps prior to the point where you actually have to stop. So there is a little bit of a difference between what people believe they can do and what people can actually do when they really push outside their comfort zone. So this difference is so important for stimulating muscle growth, stimulating adaptation in general, that it's something that requires a video of its own. So what we would call this is your proximity to failure, meaning how close you are to the point where you cannot physically perform 1 more good quality full range of motion rep. So this is a difficult thing to gauge. And as I said, most people have a bit of a panic response in which if they're performing a set, the set starts to burn, it starts to get challenging, it starts to get painful, and their brain starts to activate a panic response telling them that they can't do any more and they just can't do it and they have to stop. And on average, as I said in the beginning of the video, that happens 5 reps before the point where they actually need to stop. So the first thing that you want to be aware of is you will have this panic response in the beginning stages of your training, and you want to learn to essentially tame this as best you can. Because if you can push through this, get outside your comfort zone and stay calm during your sets, you'll probably more accurately be able to assess how many more reps you have left before the point where the muscle gets so exhausted that you physically can't do 1 more rep. Now the next thing you want to understand is as you get closer and closer to the point where you've reached failure, that you can't do any more reps even if you tried, the reps multiply in the stimulus that they offer. So we have what has been coined as lead-up reps and effective reps. All reps are technically effective, but this is just the popular terms these days, and actually for a simple description it works really well. So let's say, for example, you can only physically do 10 reps. Gun to your head, you cannot do more than 10 reps. You couldn't do an 11th if you tried like your life depended on it. Every single rep is good quality, full range of motion, but the last one is just such a fight, there's no way you could do another one. So now I've colorfully described that. The first 7 is what we would typically call lead-up reps. The last 30%, so in this case you've done 10, the last 30% would be the last 3 reps. Those are what we call the effective reps. And that's because the stimulus that they offer, because the muscle is so close to the point of being exhausted, multiplies so much that in comparison, the first 7 we just call lead-up reps because they essentially lead you up to the good ones. Those last 3 are the ones we came for. And the trick is understanding when you're panicking, when you're telling yourself you're done before you're actually done. So training intensity and your proximity to failure, the first thing that you want to understand is you will have a panic response, and that's normal and that's okay, but you want to start to tame it. And as the set starts to get difficult and challenging and you activate the panic response, be aware of it and try and remind yourself to breathe and stay calm and just do 1 more. Just see how much more you can push on. Because you can remind yourself that the closer you go to the point where you truly can't do anymore, I'm not saying actually fail and hurt yourself, I'm not saying that, but the closer you come to the point where you physically can't do any more good quality reps, the more stimulus that you are going to basically apply to the body, to the point where it's really, really valuable if you want to make some good progress. So one of the best guides to start to learn how close you are to failure is if your last rep, when you're moving the weight, it actively slows down involuntarily, no matter how hard you try. That is the first sign, because if you are not truly close to the point where the muscle is almost completely exhausted, you might put a lot of effort into the last rep, or what you think is the last rep, but the last rep might still come up quite quickly. Say, for example, I'm doing a bicep curl. If it comes up quite quickly, even though you feel like you're putting a lot of effort into it, it's not your last rep. What we would want is more of an obvious sticking point where the rep kind of almost doesn't happen, but you have to put everything you possibly have into making it move, and you just know for a fact you're not going to do one more. And this is very subjective, I know. But you would reach the point where there's an obvious sticking point and really have to battle through it, and then to complete the rep. And then you would put it down. And that would be your guide as to knowing how close to actual failure that you were. If there was an obvious sticking point, if no matter how hard you tried, involuntarily, that last rep, it was so difficult and slow to move the rep, you're probably on the right track. Now, the last thing that I'll say on this is because that's all seems very vague, and it is very vague, and it's important to understand that this is something that you build over time. And as an absolute beginner who's first stepped foot in the gym, this is not that important. You just need to get good at technique, general technique. But as you start to get more and more advanced, you've been training for 6 months, a year and a half, you will naturally need to start getting better and more aware at how hard you're truly training because your body becomes less stimulus sensitive. Therefore, we need to do a little bit more in order to stimulate adaptation. But by then, it also gives you a bit of a grace period to practice the skill, because it is a skill, of training hard and also not letting your technique break down. So hopefully I've described training intensity, or as it's popularly used, that term these days, and how to know if you're training hard enough or not, I should say. So hope this helps.